have a confession to make about this show. Growing up, I never learned how to ride a bicycle. I grew up on a very steep hill, and I was too afraid of trying and falling and hurting myself that I never learned. Even as I got into my teenage years and later my adult years, I thought, what's the point of trying to learn to ride a bike? And in spite of my own fears and doubts, we made sure that our daughter would learn to do so. For some, learning to ride a bike is like a rite of passage. It's a gateway to a world of freedom and independence to explore. But for others, bicycles are out of reach. Instead of being a gateway, it's a gate that's locked. Women and people of color have historically been excluded from cycling. But members of the cycling community are working now to change the image of who a cyclist can be. This is Disrupted. I'm Kalila Brown-Dean. Today we look at representation in cycling. Later in the show, we'll learn about how bicycles provided women with an independence that many men fought against. We'll also hear from a cyclist who's training for next year's Paralympic Games. But first, Leta Highsmith. She's a league cycling coach with the League of American Bicyclists. She's the first Black woman to be a cycling coach in the history of that organization. Leta, welcome to Disrupted.
Thank you for having me.
You have made some tremendous accomplishments in the world of cycling. But before we get to that latest achievement, I want to actually go back to when you first learned how to ride a bike. What was that experience like for you? And how did it perhaps set you in this lifetime interest in cycling?
I was probably 7, 8 years old when I learned how to ride a bike, and my siblings and I each got a bicycle with trainer wheels on it. And I watched my sister and brother go through their trials and tribulations, and then I got on my bike and started riding. So the training wheels came off almost immediately. I was grown at that point. I could do things that big people could do, adults could do. So now I was free.
I hear that sense of freedom, that ability for you to explore on your own terms within bounds, of course, but also having the ability to go to places, to experience them and decide what you wanted to do and where you wanted to be. And I wonder if for you now, is riding that same sense of freedom? What is the experience of cycling like for you today?
So yes, it is that same sense of freedom, expanded. It's exploration, it's visiting, it's thinking, it's me time, it's fitness time. So cycling that went from exploring the neighborhood or visiting my neighborhood friends has grown to be something that is more than that. It's exploring a community.
So this freedom that you have to now ride, to think through things that you may be mulling over, or just decide how you want to exercise and care for your body and your mind is what I hear, that connection, this sort of total approach to riding. But you aren't someone who just does this recreationally because you love it or you enjoy it. You have now taken it to the next level of this remarkable achievement of being named or earning the distinction of being a league cycling coach for the League of American Bicyclists. Tell our listeners, what is that league and what is your role within the league?
Okay, the League of American Bicyclists is a member organization. We're about 200,000 strong now. It wasn't always an inclusive organization, and we can talk about that if you'd like a little bit later, but it's primarily education, advocacy through some of their various programs. My role right now with League of American Bicyclists is I'm a league cycling coach. I started out as a league cycling instructor, and I realized that the more I taught bicycling education classes, the more there was for me to learn and grow, and the more there was a need for cycling instructors of color. And then when I explored the coaching piece of working within the league, I realized there were no women, African American women. There were women coaches, yes, but not African American coaches that were women. And I had to go forward with that.
I want to go back to something that you mentioned in the beginning of your answer to that question, which is that the League of American Bicyclists wasn't always inclusive. Talk to us a little bit about that history of it not being inclusive and how it may have encouraged or inspired you to achieve the things you're doing today.
Okay, well, the league was founded in 1880 as the League of American Wheelmen. And the women were allowed to join, and at that point, there was not a color barrier to membership of the league. However, there were nuances depending upon if you were in the northern states or the southern states. Around 1894, the board chair of the league at that time worked very hard and campaigned and was successful in putting a color ban on the League of American Cyclists. So existing members could still remain. For example, Kitty Knox, as a woman, an African American woman, she was allowed to remain in the league. Because the league sanctioned races, African Americans and people of color were allowed to race, but they were not allowed to join the league. The league went through phases. It pretty much waned off in the turn of the century, revived again in the 1930s, died off again a little bit. But in 1999, the board chair at the time realized that formally the bylaws were not changed, the constitution of the league was not changed to remove the color barrier. So 1999, he made it his mission, and the board formally voted to remove that ban. So fast forward, the league is still at that point, and perhaps still now, it's slowly changing. White males is the predominant. However, the league is acknowledging that the more people that ride, the safer we all are, the healthier we all are, the more connected a community we all are. So equity and inclusion becomes a big part of the league. And I want to be a part of that movement. I want to be there to be the face of, yes, cyclists in 2023 can look like me, can be built like me, and have the same enjoyment as any other cyclist.
When I hear the history of that league, it sounds so similar to the history of other sports or other leagues and associations connected to recreation and leisure. But this is a history, Leta, that I don't think most people are aware of. And you said you want to be a part of that. You want to be a part of that change. You are not just a part of it. You are leading much of that change. You now hold the distinction of being the first Black woman cycling coach within the league. What is that achievement? The fact that it's happening now, what does that achievement mean for you?
Well, it's bittersweet. It's a shame that it's happening now in 2023. However, I am delighted to be the first. It makes a very powerful statement. I'll share a story of why it's so important to you. And I teach bicycling education classes, and waiting for a class to begin, I watched the students assemble. And they were all African American women who came to this class. Great. So when it came time for the class, I announced that I was their instructor and I would be leading them through the class, and introduced myself. And one of the students said, "Oh my goodness, you look like me." And I realized then and there, the messenger is as important as the message. And at that point, I said, I am becoming a coach. And that started the journey. I am so glad I did, because when I work with students and children, especially children of color, it's just empowering, because they see what they can become. When I work with children of color, especially those with braided and elaborate hairstyle, I'm able to empathize with them and help them fit their helmets correctly, which many white instructors simply don't know. It's not a criticism. One doesn't know what they don't know. But from my perspective, I can be very empathetic with those students and connect with them.
The level of awareness that you have. So simple things that many people may take for granted, which is the fitting of a helmet. If you have a hair or your hair is covered because of your religious traditions, having that helmet fit is so critical for safety, but it's also critical for representation and affirmation. So much of your life and your work, Leta, has focused on giving that sense of dignity and strength to communities, to whether it's immigrant communities, communities of color, just people more broadly. How does this fit into your overall purpose in life of that ability to say, I have this opportunity, let me make the most of it, not just for yourself, but for others who may be looking to you or be inspired by you?
I realize I am richly blessed. And those of us who are richly blessed, or any of us, should give back and reach out and touch someone and make someone's life better. I truly believe that. And it could be something as simple as encouragement. Yes, you can do this. Or yes, you should try this. Or a suggestion or an offer of assistance or help. So I think me as a being, my purpose is to help others be better. So I think it's very important for me in the realm of cycling to just share the love and share the joy and help share the access and be creative to that access. For some, the trail seems so far away or riding seems so far away when actually you can do that in your neighborhood, which brings us to infrastructure and, what is available in inner city versus, suburban environments, urban environments, etc. So access and awareness is important as well.
I read a story about a new cycling club for students at Clinton Avenue School in New
Yes,
Haven.
yes.
And it was beautiful to see all of these young faces filled with joy and excitement and wonder, especially at a time where too often I think young people are not allowed to experience that joy. And so to see their faces beside their coaches and their teachers who shared this equal excitement, and together they were going out into New Haven to ride and to support one another. And I thought about you and the work that you're doing, the importance of cycling as a way of creating access for people and opportunity. And then it led to this, to me, the natural next question, which is for you, as someone who is a coach, who has a love for the capacity and potential of this. What do you see as the future of cycling and the kind of changes that you'd like to see coming forward?
I see a future of more people cycling, and that is my hope. I would like to see cycling taught in the schools. Driver education manuals for the states. If you look at our driver education manuals, a paragraph, maybe two, is dedicated to cycling. Why can't there be more than a paragraph or two about cycling? Vulnerable user laws, that needs to change. Awareness and community yielding, just the kindness of cycling just needs to be taught. The Clinton Avenue project is amazing. I rode with them last year, and those young adults were absolutely phenomenal and amazing. And those are our future drivers, right? And those are our future community leaders. Awareness that what cycling did for them as adults, they will make sure that that continues and that legacy grows. And that's the motion or the movement I want to be part of. I think that's very important, that we're setting the example for these potential future leaders.
You've named a number of policy changes that could come forth to promote cycling, but really to promote health, safety, and community connection. And one thing that I know about you is that if there is a need, you will certainly respond to it and be a part of leading that. Leta Highsmith is league cycling coach with the League of American Bicyclists. Thank you so much for sharing with us today.
Absolutely, my pleasure.
That was Leta Highsmith, league cycling coach with the League of American Bicyclists. Coming up, we'll learn why suffragist Susan B. Anthony thought the bicycle had done more to emancipate women than any other thing in the world. We'll also hear more about bicycle racer Kitty Knox. And later, an elite paracyclist talks about facing self-doubt. This is Disrupted. Stay with us. Welcome back to Disrupted. I'm Kalila Brown-Dean. This hour, we're looking at some of the ways that cycling has historically excluded certain groups. Hannah Ross is author of Revolutions: How Women Changed the World on Two Wheels. And if you hear any noises in the background, it's because Hannah was answering my questions while looking after her beautiful baby. I asked Hannah about some of the earlier iterations of the bicycle and what cycling was like for women back then.
So the first bicycle, as we would recognise it today, came onto the market around the 1870s. Various iterations of bicycle type machines had been in production for many decades previous to this. But what made this so unique and eventually so popular is that it had air-filled tyres, pneumatic tyres, which made a big difference because previous bicycles did not have this, made them very uncomfortable. And it had a pedal and chain system as we'd recognise it today. The bicycle that had been most popular prior to this was called the high wheel, which many listeners may be able to visualize. It had an extremely enormous big wheel and a very little rear wheel. They seem very peculiar to us now, but were extremely popular and also quite dangerous, as you can imagine. So the bicycle that came after this, they called it the safety bicycle, almost as a sort of response to the dangers inherent in the high wheel. And one of the things that about the high wheel, it was dangerous, but you can probably imagine that if you, as women at this time, were meant to be wearing long skirts. That was sort of the fashion for women at this time. Great big long skirts to the floor, petticoats, not the kind of outfit that you would get on a very high wheel, precarious wheel. The safety bicycle, for many women, that really opened up the opportunity to ride a bicycle, which they hadn't really had before. And it took a while for many women to come to the bicycle. So I'd say it was until the 1890s, so nearly 2 decades on, that was when it was sort of the bicycle was at its peak, and women were sort of, I would say, representing around 30% of cyclists at this time, which was quite a lot given the fact that, as I said, women's fashions were very prohibitive to any exercise of any sort. And the kind of social mores of the day, were very restrictive on women's movement in general, both kind of socially and politically and economically. But bicycle manufacturers realised quite early on that women could make up quite a large percentage of the market. And so they started marketing the safety bicycle and types of safety bicycle with a drop bar so that they could step over easily, chain guards so their skirts didn't get caught up in the chain, so that they were accessible to women. And this would have been, at this time, as I said, women's movements were really quite restricted. There was no kind of mass sport really that women were playing. Some women would have been able to ride horses, side saddle. Upper class women may have taken part in the sort of genteel, what were then genteel sports of tennis or croquet. But this was really the first kind of mass leisure sport that women took up in great numbers. And you can sort of see why when life as a woman was so restricted, that the bicycle offered this kind of ability to sort of get on and cycle somewhere you want to go.
You've mentioned a number of things, the physical structure and construction of the bicycle, which, as you said, was dangerous for people in general, but particularly for women, given the very socially conservative norms about women's dress and public presentation. So there's that aspect of the construction of the bicycle not being compatible with how women were told to conform at the time. There also were these restrictions on women's movement and ability more broadly. And when you mention that this innovation really came about in the 1890s, it's a reminder of what women were dealing with globally, of a fight to even be seen as an autonomous human with rights, with opportunities and options and choices. And so in your book, and I think this is really important for that context, you quote Susan B. Anthony, the very famous suffragist and really international women's leader, who said, "The bicycle has done more to emancipate women than any one thing in the world." That was shocking and surprising when I read it. And I thought, that's really an inflated way of seeing it. But hearing your context about these broader political, economic, and social restrictions gives a different weight to that quote. What did Susan B. Anthony mean that the bicycle has done more to emancipate women?
I suppose a slightly ironic thing about this quote is that Susan B. Anthony never actually got to ride a bicycle. She was fairly advanced years when the bicycle became popular, but even not being able to actually get on a bicycle, she really identified with the fact that this was a freedom machine, as she called it, because it represented this idea of as you say, this autonomy, which was really an extremely novel concept for when it came to most women's lives at this time. Of course, there were many women who sort of went against this idea that women's place was in the home. This is how it was seen, that women's place was domestic. It was men that lived in public spaces and occupied public spaces and public life, and women should remain indoors. And so the bicycle is complete opposite of that. It offers this freedom of movement under your own steam, under your own energy. And that was really revolutionary. And the thing about the bicycle and when it appeared, there's a certain a kind of history to what Susan B. Anthony is saying. The context is that around this time, there was a great upsurge in women's political movement. So that's movements to get the vote, where almost nowhere women had the vote at this time, and just political freedoms. There were women who were campaigning for change in women's dress, to rationalize women's dress, for women to be able to wear trousers and all this. I mean, it's so hard to imagine now that even just a woman wearing trousers would have been absolutely shocking, like newspaper worthy shocking almost. So these two events, bicycle and this kind of real upsurge in the idea of women becoming more autonomous and independent, they are sort of interconnected in a way. So it was almost as if Susan B. Anthony, the bicycle kind of symbolized that struggle. So it came along and it represented the idea of what women should be able to do.
Listening to you think about that and that connection, what's so key during that time was the sense of paternalism that we are protecting women from harm. We don't want women to vote because it's a dirty enterprise of politics, and we want to preserve that purity. We don't want women to wear trousers because they may be approached differently or not respected. And one of the other ways that paternalism shows up, Hannah, is all of the medical misconceptions about the impact on women's bodies, the impact potentially on their reproductive abilities. Really, from the entirety of a woman's body, the idea was cycling, being on a bicycle, will be dangerous to their health and well-being. And so we need to protect women from, that kind of harm. Can you give our listeners an example of two of, those medical harms that dominated the discussion about whether women should be on a bicycle?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is a really sort of key part of the campaign against stopping women riding bicycles. So yeah, you talk about paternalism, but I would go to further and just say it's the patriarchy, that it's all about repressing women, and it's about keeping women, the idea of like not wearing trousers, so not being like men, being baby makers essentially. And the baby makers thing really comes into the kind of anti-cycling argument. So what was, I think, a lot of people found particularly shocking was that women sat astride a bicycle. So they think about this time women were riding horses, but they were riding side saddle. This idea of just sitting on a bicycle. So there were some doctors who then went so far as to say just sitting on a bicycle could cause you to become infertile. That was a really sort of famous argument, a key argument at the time, obviously completely groundless in any way whatsoever. And then some of them felt that a lot of people felt that sitting on a bicycle seat was overtly sexual. Again, it's just this idea of controlling women's bodies, keep them in their place, to keep this order that suited men, that it was men who went out into the world and it was women who stayed at home having babies, and to tell them that doing something like riding a bicycle would prevent them from doing them, to make them almost outsiders. And one of the sort of themes that comes up again and again is this idea that what men were scared of, or what they thought they were scared of, was the idea of women becoming men, women becoming more like men, then therefore taking the power from them. So this idea of sort of if you start wearing what was seen then as men's clothes, that you would become like a man, which is very extraordinary. And so there were, in some countries, they even went as far as to make it illegal. In France, it was illegal for women to wear trousers, although when cycling became popular, they actually amended the law to say that women could wear trousers if they were holding the reins of a horse or on a bicycle, which just shows how popular cycling eventually became, and how even the French government recognised that it was probably safer to cycle in a pair of trousers than a great big long skirt. But there were other doctors at this time who really supported women cycling and taking exercise, because they saw, quite rightly, that physical exercise had huge benefits for women's health. I read through lots of cycling magazines from the time in the 1890s, and women would write in saying how their lives were absolutely transformed when they took up cycling, how they'd felt continually ill. And then once they'd taken up cycling and physical activity, they were just full of health and happiness, which sounds a bit simplistic, but I'm sure it would have had a really great benefit.
As you're talking about the different ways of controlling women's bodies, controlling women's access, the idea of, who is entitled to wellness, who's entitled to physical activity for their mental wellness and their physical well-being, we see that come up in many different ways. And I'm thinking in particular about women of color who are sort of moved out of that idea of womanhood, of femininity, and the need to be protected. And you talk in your book that for many women of color, being on the bicycle was an act of defiance. It was a small way of affirming the agency that they had in a world, in a country, in a community that often denied us. Why was being on a bicycle an act of defiance for those women?
There's a famous example that I use in the book that's quite well known of a cyclist called Kitty Knox, who was a African American living in Boston, Massachusetts, and she belonged to what was called the League of American Wheelmen, which at the time was the biggest cycling organization in America. And the Kitty Knox became quite well known, but partly sort of in some ways for the wrong reasons, is that she belonged to the League of American Wheelmen, and sections of the League of American Wheelmen in the southern states wanted to. So this was in the early days of cycling, in the early 1890s. They wanted to ban anyone non-white from becoming a member of the organization. They did actually succeed in this, but initially what they didn't ban was existing members. And when the League of American Women had a annual meetup, Kitty Knox went. Of course she went, she was a member. It caused quite a sensation, which was actually made out of cycling magazines, international newspapers, that this African American woman, and Kitty also wore what was called rational dress, which was not skirt, it was bloomers, which were sort of trousers which ended just below the knee, and jackets. She wore clothing adapted to cycling, and she, from all accounts, seemed to be quite into racing on her bike. Again, something that was quite shocking to people. But most of all, as I said, it was the fact that she was an African American woman. And, obviously now it's really quite horrifying to read these reports. But she stayed the course. She defied everyone. She knew that she had a right to be there. Cycling did actually become quite a upper class and genteel activity for women as well at this time. So there are kind of, when you look through the magazines at this time, there was sort of reports of the women from New York society taking on their bicycles, riding around Central Park and up Fifth Avenue. The League of American Wheelmen eventually ended up banning any people of colour from joining the organisation. So they became more extreme as time went on.
Having read the book and hearing you talk about these stories and these experiences, and there are so many of those stories in the book, in the different ways that women defined their path, stayed the course, as you said, but also the obstacles that they encountered along the way. If I'm honest with you, I will never be able to look at a bicycle again as just sort of this simple tool for exercise or transportation. There's so many layers and stories that are connected to that really you have now woven a story that stretches across generations and stretches across place. And so I want to ask you this last question that may seem a little personal, but you are a mom. You are a cyclist. You have written this amazing book that I think challenges all of us to think about the things we take for granted, but also how the choices we make today can create a better path in the future and what we want to pass on. What is it that you want readers to take away after they read this book and they think about their own sense of connection and purpose? What is it that you want readers to take away?
I don't know there's one answer to that in a way, because I suppose I want, in a sense of understanding the history of this, it's that riding a bike for women has always been political. I think that's the thing that I think is most resounding throughout the book. And that's not just women of the 1890s, it's women throughout history, it's women even today. You know, people have said that men have always just been able to just get on a bicycle without thinking. But for women, it has always been a political issue. And the fact, as I said, that it remains so, and it's, you know, and it's not, I'm not just talking about places like Afghanistan where it's completely banned for women to cycle, or Iran, or, you know, Saudi Arabia, where it's very difficult for women to ride bikes. It's much more like it was a century or so ago in Western countries. But it's still political. There's still, women still have to think about, you know, safety. Many women feel that they are a particular, they get sort of particular unwanted attention just for riding a bicycle, or whether it's in the professional sport that women aren't paid enough, they're not given enough opportunities, that there's a disparity between the men's racing, the women's racing. It's sort of across the whole of cycling, and cycling is sometimes quite difficult to talk about. Not difficult, but it's because it encompasses so many different things. It's a sport, it's a leisure activity, but also it's a utilitarian object. It's something you use to get around. It's your public transportation for many people, and sometimes it's an absolute lifeline for people. It means them being able to get to school, get to work when they don't have other forms of or access to other forms of transport. So it's the fact that it still remains a very political object, and access and inclusion are still very much issues. But also on the more positive side, one of the things that I was particularly passionate about was just inspiring, as well as talking about the negative aspects of the history, how amazing and how inspiring so many people have been in the history of cycling, that they've just, you know, continued to cycle in the face of prejudice and discrimination, and really done extraordinary things. And for me now, in a world that's actually on fire, it's one that cycling is one of the things that we can do in our way to, try and contribute less to our climate footprint.
This is definitely a story of purpose, of resilience, and also possibility. Hannah Ross is author of Revolutions: How Women Changed the World on Two Wheels. Hannah, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much. It's been great talking to you.
Coming up, we'll talk to a paracyclist who just competed in a world championship competition in Scotland. This is Disrupted. Stay with us. Welcome back to Disrupted. I'm Kalila Brown-Dean. This hour, we're talking to people who expand our ideas of who can be a cyclist. Katie Walker is paracyclist for Team USA. When I spoke to her, she was in Scotland for the 2023 UCI Cycling World Championships. She competed in the 500-meter time trial and the team sprint. Katie competes in track cycling. It's an indoor cycling competition where athletes bike on an oval-shaped surface with a steep incline. Katie was born in Taiwan with partial loss of her left arm. She was adopted at the age of 2 and moved to Ohio. Asked her about growing up in the Buckeye State and how she discovered her love of athletics.
Growing up in Ohio, I started actually sports at a very, very young age. And surprisingly, I grew up in a predominantly Caucasian community. And so I was very different looking in my community. But surprisingly, I grew up just, I guess, quote unquote, normal. So yeah, I played a lot of sports. I got good grades, involved in my community. So yeah, I think sports was just integral in my upbringing and forming me as a person. And yeah, I can't really thank sports enough for that. Really, it just gave me confidence as well.
So you said you had a pretty normal, regular upbringing there in Ohio. Did that carry through for you into adulthood where, you were able to do what you wanted to do to pursue your interests with confidence because of athletics? Or did you encounter any challenges along the way?
Oh yeah, no, I definitely encountered some challenges, and then actually, before moving, I moved down to San Diego right after graduating college. But my freshman year in college, I was recruited to play softball, and I think that's where my mindset shifted from having that confidence, um, to being actually very insecure and feeling unaccepted. And it was just a mindset shift surrounding my disability and feeling like people wouldn't accept me because of it. And yeah, my experience my freshman year playing softball, it's pretty terrible. And it wasn't because of the other people on my team. I felt like, again, I was being excluded. I felt all the negative emotions. But later on, I realized it was me and my insecurity. And it kind of put off people, I think.
We hear a lot now from young people who are very vocal about the challenges that they're navigating, that sense of self-doubt or how they sort of go inward and close themselves off because they're trying to figure out the next day and how they can just be themselves. What does it mean for you to be in this position now where young people look to you as a role model? They look to you to say, if she could do that, I could do it too. What does that mean for you now?
It really means so much. Just growing up, I didn't really have role models who look like me. And so me being able to be that for somebody else, that's exactly why I decided to start parasport, is so I could be a role model for those people with disabilities, and even for people who don't have disabilities.
So let's talk about what you're doing now. You talked about softball in college, but you came into cycling fairly recently, given how many people see this as a sport they've done their whole lives, and you've excelled at it. Talk to us about that move from softball into cycling. And what is it about cycling that makes you say, this is it for me?
Transitioning from softball, I actually also did para track and field back in 2013, and then into cycling. It's been an accelerated path for me. And it's been a journey of a lot of setbacks, a lot of failures, but also a lot of successes.
What is it about cycling in particular that drives you, that connects you to that kind of passion and energy that you have for athletics?
For my event, I'm more of a sprinter. And so it's kind of just that go, 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 that intensity, that it's just going back to sport and just being in that present moment, and just really that adrenaline that is just exciting, and it's fun, exhilarating, so it's all the things.
Now, I'm sure that our listeners can hear it in your voice, but I see it on your face, how you responded. You really lit up when you talked about that connection and that adrenaline and that passion. We are recording this interview on August 7th, and you are currently in Scotland competing, as I said, in the Cycling World Championships. And this is, I believe, your second time competing in the World Championships. What's it like? What's the experience of competing at that level?
So again, the only word I can use is exhilarating. And this is also a unique experience for us because we're competing in super worlds. And so what that means is every cycling discipline is here together. And trackside, we are competing with the able-bodied elites as well, and so that's different from us or from last year. And so it just makes it that much more exciting to have so many more just people supporting and so many more athletes here competing.
What is it that you want people to know, to understand, or to respect about athletes who are competing with disabilities? And again, I'm thinking of the many young people who are figuring out their way and maybe drawing inspiration from that. What should we know?
I think people should know that we, just people with disabilities, and I guess specifically in the para community competing and training, is that we train just as hard. We are just as committed. We make just as many sacrifices as any other person, training to be an Olympian or an elite athlete. And I think also just the added component of having to adapt and those adaptations that we have to make as a para athlete. It's challenging, but it's just so rewarding at the end of the day.
That sense of adaptability, that need to adapt is really a life lesson, not just for athletics and competition, but for so many aspects of our lives. I'm curious, what you're seeing as you are competing with athletes from other countries. Do you think about those differences in the United States versus on a more global stage? Are there things in the U.S. that we get right when it comes to supporting athletes? Or are there things that you say, we could really do this to strengthen what our athletes are able to accomplish?
I think we are definitely shifting towards more accessibility, more inclusion. And I think that's just just from just having more representation. The social media is huge in that representation. The Paralympic movement, I think we're doing a lot of things right here in the United States. I think internationally as well. They're doing. I think we're all shifting towards inclusion. But of course, there's still a lot of work to be done, but we're going in the right path.
Speaking of the right path and that sort of move toward inclusion, we are about a year away from the Paralympic Games in Paris, which start in August of 2024. What are you thinking about as you train for that experience?
So every day is a training day. Every day it's just being in just focus, just having that mindset that, it's just around the corner. And just bringing it, with the same level of intensity day to day.
So as we come to a close of our time together, I want to ask you one last question. And that is, what do you think you've learned about yourself through cycling and through competition?
A lot. Cycling. It's just with sport and competition, you just learn, you just have more character, like you just build your character. You build more resilience, just acceptance, towards other people, yourself, camaraderie. There's just so many lessons I've learned through cycling and through sport.
That was Katie Walker, paracyclist for Team USA. She spoke to me from Scotland, where she was competing in the 2023 UCI Cycling World Championships. Disrupted is produced by Kevin Chang Barnum, Wayne Edwards, Meg Dalton, and Katie Tolarski. Special thanks to our interns Carol Chen and Stacy Addo. You can listen to all the previous episodes of Disrupted by finding us wherever you get your podcasts. Just search for Disrupted and Connecticut Public. And if you love an episode, please remember to share it and leave us a comment. I'm Kalila Brown-Dean. Here's hoping it's never too late to learn.